Okay.
So we're expecting about 9 or 10 on Zoom, and there are 2 or 3 on YouTube, but additional people have been joining during the day.
Okay. Okay, very good. So have you got any energy left, or are you all sleepy and tired? You all right? Yeah? Yeah. You won't keep that well, right? Okay, so, okay, very good. You've been a bit choky, is that right? Yeah? Okay, you are the president of the ASA? Not anymore. Who is the new president? Tampa. Okay. And what are you doing now? Do you have any position still, or are you? Vice chair. Okay. Okay. So I got to behave myself, and I got to do the right thing. Okay. And Venerable, what is your name? Tring. Tring. Okay. Okay. You are from the Bhutanese. Okay. Okay. Very good. Okay. Nice to have you here. Okay. Great. And hello to everyone online. I can see you down there. That's good. I can see myself as well, I guess. Okay, that's great. Okay, so let's get started. So what I'm going to talk about today is Sangha Kamma in early Buddhism. And the idea behind this is that, first of all, Sangha Kamma is all about how the Sangha functions as a community. Yeah, Sangha is obviously Sangha, and Kamma is action, yes, karma in Sanskrit. And these are very specific actions. This doesn't refer to kind of ordinary actions, but this refers to the procedures of the Sangha, how the Sangha makes decisions, yeah, how we ordain people, how we have the uposatha ceremonies, how we create Sangha officials to work on behalf of the Sangha, and any kind of decision made by the Sangha is ideally made through this procedure called Sangha Kamma. And this is what this is about. This is kind of the purpose of the background for this. But one of the, I think, issues here is why did I pick this particular topic? Because there was a particular reason for that. I had something in mind. It wasn't just a random idea. And one of the reasons is that it is a topic which is very rarely taught. Yeah, this Sangha Kamma is something you don't hear about very often. But I remember when I started off teaching the Vinaya at Vinaya Monastery, when did I do that? Maybe 20 years ago or something, like that, a long time ago. Ajahn Brahmali said we should teach Sangha Kamma as well, because it is very often not understood in monasticism. And so the ideas around this are obscure to many monastics, and this is why I think it is really worthy to have a look at. And not only is it obscure, but it is very clearly part of the teaching of the Buddha. This is part of the Vinaya that he bequeathed to all monastics. And because it is part of the Vinaya that came from the Buddha, I think it is important in its own right to have some idea of what this is about. If something came from the Buddha, then to my mind it is interesting in its own right, because it came precisely for that reason. And of course the Buddha wouldn't have laid down Sangha Kammas, he wouldn't have laid down these regulations unless there was a very good reason or a very good purpose. So by trying to understand what Sangha Kamma is about, what its purpose is, how to enact it, how to do these things in our monastic life, we actually get closer to the Buddha's vision of the Dhamma and the Buddha's vision of how the Sangha is supposed to operate. And that, I think, is valuable in its own right. So this is one of the reasons I want to talk about this. And I should say, by the way, if anyone has any questions as we go along, please feel free to just to interrupt at any time. The other reason I want to talk about Sangha Kamma is because, as we know, that Buddhism has been beset by all kinds of scandals, over probably since the time of the Buddha. But the scandals that we know in the present day are getting quite. There's a lot, and there's a lot of publicity in the present day. Scandals get out. And because of that, I think that a lot of the scandals in Buddhism, all the abuse problems, sometimes people abuse the funds in the monasteries they live in, or abuse of people within the Buddhism, a lot of this, I think, can be reduced and maybe even eliminated in certain contexts if we follow the procedures that the Buddha laid down properly. So I think there's a potential here for improving the governance of the Sangha. and basically ensuring that there is less problems, less kind of newspaper headlines, etc., etc. I think this is an important reason for talking about Sangha Kamma. It's not just that, it's not just the fact that there is abuse, but there's also the problem of very often getting hurt within hierarchies, the problem of being kind of disenfranchised. When there is a hierarchy, very often the hierarchy makes the decisions, and very often the people lower down may feel that they're not really part of the decision making. They may feel left out. They may feel that things are not really done in the right way or whatever, and they don't have a voice to kind of be heard about these things. And Sangha Kamma, the whole purpose of Sangha Kamma is to avoid that sense of disenfranchisement, a sense of being left out, a sense of not having a voice. And of course that too, the idea of having a voice and being heard is also helps to reduce any forms of abuse or misuse of authority, misuse of positions of power and all of these kind of things. So this is the idea behind this. And so it's really about Buddhist governance, if you like. And at the core of Buddhist governance is this idea of Sangha Kamma. This is kind of one of the core principles that we use for the governance of the Sangha. And this is why I have chosen this title. And you will see here, it's not the Sangha Kamma, but it's Sangha Kamma in early Buddhism, not any kind of Sangha Kamma, not any kind of dodgy Sangha Kamma, but the real Sangha Kamma as the Buddha laid it down, not some kind of invention by potentially dodgy monks or dodgy whoever, but the real deal as we have kind of been passed down from the Buddhas. I'm going to look at the early text of Buddhism. I will explain a little bit maybe afterwards what that means, and then taking it from there, essentially. Here. Venerable.
Ajahn, does Sangha Kamma apply across all traditions, please?
Well, Sangha Kamma is basically our inheritance from the Buddha. So because it is our inheritance from the Buddha, and the Vinaya from the Buddha is what actually governs the Sangha in general. So I would say it applies to all traditions. And I think I'm not very familiar with the Tibetan tradition, how things work there, but I think if you look at the Vinaya as it is presented in the Tibetan tradition, I think you would find the same things there. Because even the modern manuals that I use in Tibet, they are based on the suttas. Ultimately, it comes back to the word of the Buddha, so it should apply everywhere. And if it isn't applied by some people, then I think that is a fault in that tradition, to be honest, because everyone should follow the word of the Buddha. And if you don't, then you have a problem in your tradition, in my opinion. So, okay, Sangha Kamma in early Buddhism. So let's have a look. So I'm going to start off by just discussing very briefly what the issues are. So Buddhism has serious problems, and we know that. And just to have a quick look at some of the headlines you can find in some newspapers. So this is from the Bangkok Post, 2021. It's only not even a year ago. And this is kind of one of the big headlines. Temple corruption erodes the public faith in Buddhism. Typical headline. And when you read newspapers like the Bangkok Post, you will see there is a kind of regular trickle, or maybe not trickle, maybe more like a regular kind of stream almost of articles about problems within Buddhism, individual monasteries, individual monks, and corruption in the system. Very, 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 very common to find this. This is from the Bangkok Post. One of the great things about Thailand is that they have a fairly independent press, particularly the Bangkok Post, and there's a couple of other newspapers are very independent of, fairly independent anyway, of control from the government. And so for that reason, you find a lot of social commentary and a lot of criticism about society in general in these papers. That's why I've chosen the Thai newspapers, because Thailand is obviously a major Buddhist nation, but also because they have that openness in Thailand, which is really very useful. So here's another one. You have Abbot charged with sexual abuse of young novices. The kind of typical thing you would find. Arrest warrant out for 2 months. All of this is from the Bangkok Post. So these are the kind of, just to give an idea of the kind of issues. We have seen headlines also in Australia recently. Various groups in all traditions, basically, who have been similar kind of problems in Australia. So this is an international problem. It is found everywhere in Buddhism. So we all really need to do something about this. Yeah, and so why do we have these problems? Yeah, why is it so common? Why do we find this across all the traditions? And I'm going to have a quick look at another religious order which has similar kind of problems. I said here we need to look no further than the Catholic Church. And this is a couple of articles about what is happening in the Catholic Church, which gives you a little bit of insight into why we have these problems. Yeah, this is from Ohio State University. It's written by an academic. And he says what emerges from these records, and these are the records of the Catholic Church going back about 500 years until the present, is certainly the kind of unequal power relationships that define modern instances of sexual harassment. That there is a power problem, that there are some instances where some people are more powerful than others. And this is true in any kind of hierarchical organization. But it's certainly true in organizations that are religious, because in religion there is very clear power structures where a teacher is more powerful than a student, especially when we can start to consider people as enlightened, or someone to be like the Buddha or whatever. Then this power dynamic becomes even worse. So in religion, these things are worse than in ordinary power pyramids that you find in society in general, because of that special privilege we grant to certain people within religious institutions. So power and inequality of power. Here is from an in-depth article in the Washington Post. The hierarchy has treated lay people as junior partners, reinforcing the top-down rule that has enabled clerical abuse. So here they have the hierarchies and the power relations. So I think a very important part of the problem is this hierarchical power that you find in these kind of institutions. And this is true in the Catholic Church, and because in Buddhism we also have this kind of power hierarchies, it is quite likely that we find the same kind of problems in Buddhism. So power in Buddhism, we know that power is unevenly distributed. It is very obvious when you have been around the Buddhism for a while that this is actually the case. And I will look later on at a very particular example of that, just to show you how it works in a certain context. We know that this leads to many monastics feeling disenfranchised and without a voice. A very common complaint in monasteries is that the monastery is run by the abbot, run by the people in charge, and that monastics further down don't really have any say. They don't know what's going on very often, and they just kind of live at the beck and command of the abbot of the monastery here. So this is a serious problem, and it leads to, I think, very unhealthy communities when you have an abbot which basically runs the monastery like his own little fiefdom and essentially like a king of the monastery here. We also know that it leads to abuse of various kinds, just as in the Catholic Church. We have had lots of abuse scandals in Buddhism as well, of various kinds. And last but not least, oops, what happened there? So at least in part, this comes from the present hierarchical organization of Buddhism. And I think we cannot blame these kind of things entirely on hierarchies. I think personally, I don't think it's possible to resolve the issue of abuse and not having a voice completely. I think that is almost impossible to resolve because these are human things and these come from human defilements. And human defilements are always going to be there. So what we can hope to do maybe is to reduce the problems a little bit, but not to eliminate them entirely. And if we are aware of where we may look to resolve these problems, I think there is a chance that we will be able to at least reduce the issues. So what I want to do now is let's compare how Buddhism is actually organized to how it is ideally organized. And this is going to be the main part of my presentation today, is to look at an example of how in the contemporary Buddhist world Buddhism is organized. And then I'm going to look later on at how the Buddha envisions the organization of the Sangha. And what we will see is that there is a vast gulf between the two. Yeah, the present day has no resemblance, bears no resemblance at all in how the Buddha actually suggested we should organize things. And of course, that begs the question, if we see this massive gulf between present-day organization and the way the Buddha talked about it, then we need to ask, well, what should we do about this? And one of the kind of the great things about being in Australia or being in any part of the world where Buddhism is just arriving, Buddhism is just coming in, one of the great things about that is that we have an opportunity to think anew. We don't have to follow all the ways things are done in other countries. And we have to realize that reforming Buddhism in a traditional Buddhist country is actually very difficult. It is very difficult because you have the weight of history, you have the weight of tradition, you have the weight of habits. Things have been done in a certain way for 1,000, 2,000 years. And of course, it's very difficult to reform something that has been done for so long. But in Australia, in the West, we're starting out from scratch. And we need to ask the very important question, to what extent should we follow established contemporary ways of running the Sangha or reading the suttas or practicing Buddhism, whatever? To what extent should we follow those traditions, and to what extent should we think afresh and try to kind of do things in a different way? And we are already doing things in a different way. It is, and this is kind of great. And one of the great advantages also being in Australia is that we don't have the kind of hierarchies. We don't have the state getting involved in Buddhism. We're left largely to our own devices. That's a wonderful opportunity to actually think of things in a new way. So I want to compare these two things, the way Buddhism is traditionally organized in Buddhist countries compared to how it should ideally be done according to the Vinaya. So I'm going to look at an example of an actual hierarchical organization. I'm going to look at the Thai Sangha, how the Thai Sangha is organized. And I want to say this is not because the Thai Sangha is particularly bad. That's not really the issue here. The reason I'm going to talk about the Thai Sangha is because there are documents available in the public domain that are easily accessible. So it's very easy to see how the Thai Sangha is organized. And for that reason, I'm choosing the Thai Sangha. But I think it is very clear that around the world, parallel ways of organizing happens almost in every Buddhist country in the world. They all tend to be hierarchical in a certain way. And in Sri Lanka, for example, you have the Mahanayakas. Mahanayaka literally means the great leader. Nayaka is a leader, Maha, the great leader. There used to be Sangha Raja in Sri Lanka in the old days. You have places like Burma, where you also have a similar kind of power structures. I'm not really all that familiar with how it is structured in Burma. And I think in the Mahayana tradition, Vajrayana tradition, there are similar kind of structures, with the Dalai Lama kind of on top of a large pyramid, so to speak. So Thai here is just an example because these documents are available in the public domain, so it's easy to access and to actually look at what's happening in Thailand. That's why I'm using it. It is not meant to kind of single out Thailand for particular criticism or anything like that. So what I'm going to look at is a document called the Thai Sangha Act of 1963. And this is an act that was passed by the parliament in Thailand. And it builds on previous acts. The first one came in 1902. That's when it started. The government started to control the Sangha directly. And there was another one in 1941 and then one in 1963. And there have been follow-up acts by parliament in Thailand after that, which have just been adding to this one. But this is the present one that is valid for our purposes, the Act of 1963. And this is, again, passed by the government of Thailand. So it is a government regulation of the Sangha in Thai society. It comes from the lay government controlling the Sangha. And of course, this is very interesting, because this already, you can see, is deviating quite a lot from how the Sangha operated at the time of the Buddha, when there was no control by the government of the Sangha. But here, the government are deliberately controlling the Sangha. So how do they do this? And we're going to start with the very first point here, which is perhaps the most interesting one of all of them. This is Article 7 of the Thai Sangha Act. Can you read this? Is it not too small? Yeah, you can? Okay. And it says, His Majesty the King shall install the Patriarch. Yeah? And the Patriarch is the Sangha Raja. And Sangha Raja literally means the king of the Sangha. Yeah, the Raja is the king. Sangha is obviously the monastic community. And translated here as Patriarch, but Supreme Commander, maybe, something like that. Sangha Raja. And so this is the very beginning. Remember the Sangha Raja here, because the Sangha Raja is the Patriarch. He is on top of the whole pyramid in Thai society, in the Thai Sangha. He is the one who has the ultimate power of the entire Thai Sangha. So the highest power of the Sangha is then installed by the king. Yeah, very interesting. So it means obviously that the Sangha as a whole is then under secular, under the lay people, under the ordinary society. The Sangha is controlled in a sense by the ordinary society. Because if the Sangha Raja is appointed by the king, obviously that's how things will work. So how does the king make these decisions? What is the king's basis for installing a particular Sangha Raja? And you can imagine what it is. The way that the king does this. The king has his advisors. He has his courtiers. He has all the people that has his ear. Maybe high officials within the Sangha or whatever. And they will all be fighting, to get their Sangha Raja into place. You can imagine it's all about politics. That's really how the Sangha Raja gets elected at the end of the day. Well, that will be a large part of it, at least. So you can imagine what happens then, of course, because it is all politics and everyone wants to be the Sangha Raja, everybody wants to be in power. It means that people will politic to get the Sangha Raja into place. It will not necessarily be the best candidate who has the most understanding. It will not be the candidate who has the most wisdom or insight, whether that is worldly knowledge or spiritual knowledge, but it will be someone who has the political connections and the ability to do all the worldly things that are necessary to get elected, just like any elected official in a modern democracy, for example, also will have to pull certain strings. So you can see how this is very detrimental to the Sangha right away, because you get into worldly ways of thinking here. You get into power structures, how to find position within these things. As soon as you have a hierarchy, you are creating a desire and craving to rise in that hierarchy, because with position comes status, with position comes the ability to control things, with that position comes the ability to build up your own fortune. There are some terrible examples around the world of monks who are supposed to be living a life in poverty, actually live a life that is very luxurious and have all kinds of things. So this is already very, very problematic right there, that the king has this power. And the king obviously is almost like the puppet to all these voices that whisper in his ear, you should take this one, or you should have that one. And this will be monastics and lay people and government minister, everyone will try to control what is going on, because that's how these things work. So the king installs the patriarch. The office of the patriarch is vacated upon royal command. Not only can the king install the patriarch, the king can also fire the patriarch, right? So there are all of these ideas about, well, there's a number of reasons why you are no longer the patriarch, why you are no longer the Sangha Raja. Of course, if you die, you're no longer Sangha Raja. Kind of makes sense. If you're dead, you can't really function as the Sangha Raja. So okay, we accept that. You can resign as Sangha Raja, so that's all right. You feel a bit old, you feel like you're losing your memory. Okay, I better resign because it's not working out anymore. That happens very rarely. Usually you become completely senile before that happens, and then you kind of, and someone else takes over your office, they get the power. This is actually what happened. Happened with the previous Sangha Raja of Thailand, very famous Sangha Raja. What is his name again now? I can't remember his name, but it doesn't matter. And he was completely incapacitated for over a decade. He was just lying in hospital bed for over a decade, and everyone else ran the Sangha. So this is another way of taking power, because the patriarch is out of action. Well, we can run the place. And then the last way of vacating the office is royal command, which means, if you consider what this means, it means that basically, if you are the Sangha Raja and you value that office, And anyone who becomes a Sangha Raja would normally value being in that position. It would be very tempting to be there. You are very powerful. You can tell people what to do. You have a very high status. You have all those worldly things that people are looking for in the world. You have acquired those in that position. And if you are craving for these things, then the very fact that you can be fired is going to scare you. The very fact that someone can kick you out means that you will have to hold to the party line. Yeah, it means that, whatever you think the king wants, you will tend to lean in that direction. You will lose a large part of your autonomy. You will not be able to deal with things in a way that necessarily is in the best interest of the Sangha. You will deal with things in a way that is in the best interest of you. Yeah, me. This is my position. So what does the king want me to do? What do all the courtiers want me to do? What does the government want me to do? Those people who have the ear of the king. And then you become a puppet. Of course, you don't become the puppet completely. That is impossible. But at least partially, you become a puppet of society around you. The Sangha loses its independence to a very large extent through the control at the very highest level. Yeah, so this is what is happening here. This is the Thai Sangha, essentially. So, lay society or the king is on top. Then comes the patriarch, the Sangha Raja, the whatever we call that. Then we can go further down the hierarchies. I want to have a look at this hierarchy and see how what it looks like. So this is from Article 8 of the same one. The patriarch I put all the article numbers in there because it makes it look makes it look like the real deal. So you don't have any doubt that we're dealing with real issues here. The patriarch may exercise his prerogative in issuing a patriarchal command. So once you have the king in place, then the patriarch is given the right or the prerogative of issuing patriarchal commands. In other words, he can tell the Sangha what they should do. You should do this. You should fire this monk. You should, nuns cannot become fully ordained. Whatever it is. You have a lot of power. What are the constraints on the patriarch's power? Well, the constraints, according to the constitution, are the laws of the land and the laws of the Vinaya. These are the constraints, which kind of obviously has to be the case, but within those constraints, you can exercise his command at will, essentially. That is the patriarch's prerogative. And that's kind of interesting, right? Again, what that means, of course, is that, first of all, the patriarch has then to fall into line with what the king wants or society wants. The rest of the Sangha under the patriarch then has to fall into line with what the patriarch wants. Otherwise, he can do all kinds of things to hold you to account. He can, which I'll see later on, he can punish you. He has the right to punish you under this particular Sangha Act. So you can see how this whole structure controls people, in various ways, starting with the king, going down and down into, and ultimately everyone is controlled by a worldly power, which ideas about Buddhism are very different from actually the Sangha or the Dhamma or what they really should be like. We become controlled by worldly ideas rather than being controlled by the Buddha and the ideals of Buddhism. Okay, Article 12 is to establish the Council of Elders. So this is what happens through this article. A Council of Elders is established. The Council of Elders is what is directly under the Patriarch. It's a council of 21 senior monks. There's no nuns in there, of course. That's not to be expected in these things, but there's 21 very senior monks. Some of them are taken because of the position they have already attained. They're called somdets. Somdets is kind of the highest kind of position you can have in a Buddhist society, within the Sangha in Thailand. And then all of these somdets, plus other people who are chosen specifically for these posts, become the Council of Elders. And the Council of Elders, of course, they work with the Patriarch to implement the rules and regulations for the Sangha. So this is where the power resides in the Thai Sangha, Patriarch together with the Council of Elders. And then we have Article 23, which establishes the rest of the Sangha hierarchy. And it gives the names of the hierarchy going down. and one step at a time. So what does this hierarchy look like? You want to have a look at this hierarchy? I'll give you I'll give you an idea. It's exciting, isn't it? Hierarchies are really exciting. And you can have charts, you can have pictures and things, we have hierarchies, which is really nice. So this is what it looks like. So this is the Thai Sangha hierarchy, right? So you have the king on top, and the king kind of controls the Sangha Raja. Then you have the council of elders I was just talking about. So this is called the Supreme Sangha Council, SSC in Thailand, also called the Council of Elders. It's only in the law it's called the Council of Elders. Everywhere else it's called the Supreme Sangha Council. And then under the Supreme Council of Elders, you have what is called the ecclesiastical chiefs of the provinces. So Thailand has 73 provinces, and each one of them has an ecclesiastical chief. So you can see here how that kind of goes out. So this should really have 73 rows in this one, but I can't put 73 in there. Otherwise, it would become very tiny boxes, and it wouldn't really be all that useful. And then under the province ecclesiastical chiefs, you have the town ecclesiastical chiefs. I don't know how many there are of those because I couldn't find any information. I didn't really look that hard, but I couldn't find any information on that. So I'm not sure exactly how many, but there's going to be more, because each province has a number of towns. Under the town ecclesiastical chiefs, you have the district ecclesiastical chiefs. And in Thailand, there are 928 districts. These are called ampon. These are called ampons, something like that. Ampo, I think they call them. And these Ampo is 928. They can see the pyramid here, very, very pyramidical. And then below those, you have the sub-district ecclesiastical chiefs, of which there are 7,255 to be precise. So these are one level below. And below that again comes the monasteries. So there are, according to Wikipedia, there are 33,902 active monasteries in Thailand. I have no idea how they can be so precise. This is according to the Ministry of Religion in Thailand. Thailand, everything is very well organized. 333,902 active monasteries in Thailand. Come below here. Each sub-district ecclesiastical chief is in charge of the monasteries within, sadhu. Monasteries within his sub-district. Pyramid, all the way here. So very, very hierarchical structures. And because this hierarchy is based on, the idea of having a position, and all of these positions are sought after. People try to get into these positions. People want to be there. There's a status with these positions. Because of that, you fall into the power of the hierarchy, because the hierarchy is what grants you these positions. And by default, you're going to be, to some extent, a slave to that hierarchy. It is almost impossible to avoid that. I should maybe say that from one article I read a while ago, I understand that when the king, who was in large part responsible for creating this hierarchy, this was King Mongkut, who lived back in the 1850s or so, he had this idea that the Catholic Church should be the model for how the Sangha should be organized. And this is one of the reasons why we ended up with this kind of structure, I think, because this is pretty much looks a bit like the Catholic Church. Catholic Church, you have the Pope, you have the cardinals, you have the archbishops, you have the bishops, you have, I don't know exactly how it works, but something like that. It kind of spreads out over the whole world in this way. So this is the hierarchy for you. And all of these positions are controlled by the hierarchy. And we shall see that not only these positions, but the positions of abbots and even other things as well are controlled by this hierarchy. So everything kind of comes under this. Okay. So what do you think so far? Is this interesting or is it boring here? Is it all right? Yeah? Yeah, Venerable?
Yeah, really fascinating. So thank
Yeah.
you for
Okay.
an excellent presentation. Can we just go back one step? I think in my recent readings, under the last king, there were like 17 coups during his period, of which 11 were successful. Do you see any evidence in the creation of that act or a power structure in itself, the military, to keep the general populace in under constraints? So in Western society, we've talked about the separation of the church and state, or the unanimity of that.
Yeah.
Do you have any views to express there? Did anything come up in your research?
Not really. I didn't research very carefully because I only had a very short time to prepare for this. But I think it's very likely to be connections there as well. Yeah, I mean, these are the highest power in the country, and it's almost guaranteed that there's going to be some consultation between the Sangha hierarchy and the generals. And I mean, these are all connected together. This is the establishment in Thailand. Establishment in Thailand is the king and the kind of nobility around the king, the kind of old families of Thailand, the military and the Sangha. These are this is this establishment. And all of these three, they always consult with each other. And if you look at some of the government bodies in Thailand, they kind of include all of these sides of things. So quite likely there have been consultations there and things been happening. But exactly how the influence has been going on and what exactly that would consist of, I don't know actually. Not sure. But I think that it kind of gives an idea that the general idea of top-down control, is obviously an idea that is. If it exists in the Sangha, it will exist in lay society. If it exists in lay society, it will also exist in Sangha. So it's kind of, But Thailand does apparently have a separation of state and church as well. That was a law that was passed a while ago. So they actually have that separation in Thailand, which they don't have in many other countries, like the UK, for example, haven't got that, or Norway, for that matter, hasn't got that. So in some ways, they are actually fairly progressive. So that's one of those ways. So this is how things work in Thailand, and I think things work maybe not exactly in this way in other Buddhist countries, but I suspect that even though it isn't exactly in this way, that there are parallel structures found probably throughout most of the Buddhist world. So let's carry on. So coming back to the Sangha Act again, this is Article 23. The appointment and dismissal of the preceptor. The preceptor is the one who ordains somebody. The upajjhaya is called in Pali. Not only preceptor, but the abbots of the monastery, appointment and dismissal of abbots. And then there's a list of other people as well, like vice abbots, that kind of thing. Shall be in accordance with the principles and methods laid down in the code of the Council of Elders. Council of Elders, remember, is the highest governing body of the Sangha. This is where the principles and methods are laid down. And so they decide who gets appointed, who gets dismissed, who can be a preceptor. And of course, a preceptor is a very important person, because a preceptor is someone who decides who gets to ordain, who gets to become a monk. And if you can control the appointment of preceptors in this way, it means that you have a control over basically who gets ordained in your country. Certain voices may not be considered acceptable, they don't get to ordain. If you are a kind of a slightly person maybe who is a bit critical or whatever, you can actually stop them from becoming a preceptor. At least in principle you can do that. Whether that actually is happening, I don't know, but in principle you can do that. And it kind of lays a shadow over the Sangha, where you know that you have to almost like self-censor yourself a little bit. We talk about self-censorship within the press, for example, because you know of the consequences if you don't. And the same thing will happen in this particular case. When you know the powers behind it, you will very often self-censor if you want to be part of the establishment. Otherwise, you will always be an outsider. And for me, that's one of the reasons why outsiders are often some of the most interesting people. People who actually stand outside the establishment because they are not trapped by the establishment. They're able to use their voice. And that's why they're often worthy of listening to. Sometimes they may just be complete nuts, in which case no need to listen to them. But at other times, they may actually be very interesting people, precisely for that reason. Abbot, the control, the abbots of the monastery. And this is another very interesting thing, because, of course, at the time of the Buddha, there were no abbots. This is one of those eye-opening things that people are not aware of. There were no abbots at the time of the Buddha. And we want to have a look later on how it is possible to run a monastery without an abbot. Now in Thailand, abbots are very, very powerful people. Yeah, really powerful. And so if you control the abbot, well, you're basically controlling the whole monastery because the abbot has the power over the monastery. Yeah. So the Council of Elders is vested with the power to facilitate the meting out of punishment. Yeah, so if you are a dodgy abbot, exactly, you get a smack over the wrist because you've been naughty. So you can punish people, yeah, through the hierarchy and all these kind of things. So you mete out punishment, as it says here. It does. I don't know exactly what kind of punishment, but I guess because the problem is that these sub-rules, I don't have access to all the sub-rules, the rules that have been laid down by the Council of Elders. I don't know what they are. I can't really say exactly how they do this, but yeah, maybe that's part of the mystique, that no one knows exactly what they can do. So Article 28, a bhikkhu who was declared by a court of law to be a bankrupt is to disrobe himself within 3 days after the final judgment is passed. Yeah, so it means someone who has, well, I guess he has, maybe he has gone into a contract or something, and then he is not able to kind of meet the obligations in the contract, and then he gets bankrupted by the court or something like that. So he is a bankrupt in that sense, legally a bankrupt. So here you have it is saying that you have to disrobe, yeah, even though there is no basis for this in the Vinaya, yeah, in the rules and regulations of that we have from the Buddha. There's no basis in saying you have to disrupt because you are bankrupt. There was no such thing as bankruptcy, probably. Or maybe there were, actually. We underestimate the ancient Indian society. There probably were bankrupts in a certain sense. But yeah, so it gives the power to disrobe monks, yeah, or nuns or whatever, I suppose. Article 29, very similar. In the event that a bhikkhu is accused of a crime and arrested, the police authority is vested with the power to disrobe him. Yeah, so here, if you commit any kind of crime, yeah, and the police kind of get hold of you, they can disrobe you. So this again is completely extra to the Vinaya, completely extra to the rules and regulation. There's nothing in there where it says that if you are arrested, you are no longer a monk. And one of the reasons was because basically in the time of the Buddha in India, you could not be arrested as a monk. Yeah, you'd be like above the law in a sense. But that is no longer the case. And so these new rules have come into play. Of course, you could argue in this case that you are not actually disrobed, just because the police disrobe you by physically removing your robes or whatever, doesn't actually mean that you are really disrobed in terms of still being a monk or a nun for that matter. But most likely, if your robes are taken away and you're told that you're disrobed, probably most monks would consider themselves no longer to be monks. But from a Vinaya point of view, you are still a monk because you haven't actually breached any of the fundamental precepts or ideas in the Vinaya. But this is kind of worrying, right? Because what is a crime in a particular society? Well, this will really depend on the kind of society you're talking about. In certain societies, a crime will be to talk badly about the king, for example. This is what you have in Thailand. So if you were to argue that the system whereby the king appoints the Sangha Raja, and actually it's worse, which we'll see in a second is actually worse than that, where the king appoints the Sangha Raja is not acceptable from the point of view of the Vinaya or the Sangha hierarchy, yeah? If that is the view of a bhikkhu, you can't really say that, because this would be against the law in a place like Thailand, where you have this very famous lèse majesté laws, where you cannot speak against the king at all. Yeah? So basically, you can start to get disrobed for things that we should be able to speak about, things that affect the Sangha itself. You can't talk about them, for goodness sake, because it is a crime to talk about things that have directly related to the Sangha, how we operate, whether we are independent or not. And then you have to disrobe, and you can see how all of this creates a very powerful hierarchy that can control the Sangha in very tight and very dangerous ways, and how this can lead the whole Sangha astray, become more worldly, become entrapped in worldly ideas, in ideas of power, of status, of money, of wealth, all the things that have nothing to do really with what monasticism is about. The construction, establishment, combination, removal, abrogation, and applying for official recognition of consecrated boundaries, these are the semas of monasteries, shall conform to ministerial regulations. Yeah, semas are one of the fundamental aspects of how monasteries operate, and we shall see in a second why that is the case. Without the semas, you cannot really have Sangha Kamma, which are the decision-making apparatus of the Sangha. Semas are fundamental to this. So by controlling the semas, again, the Sangha hierarchy is controlling who does what, where it is possible to do things. And then they will look after those monasteries that have real semas and make sure that they behave in the right way. So again, this is control of what is happening here across the boundaries of the monasteries. So whatever are those ministerial regulations, you have to be a good monk, you have to do the right thing, you can't have any, whatever it is, they will lay that down, and you come under the control of the society at large. Article 36, there shall be an abbot for a monastery. Every monastery shall have an abbot. And that makes sense. If you see the hierarchy we had before, it makes sense that there should be an abbot, because that is then the kind of, it takes that hierarchy to its logical conclusion, whereby you have the last kind of person in charge is the abbot, who controls the lowest unit of this hierarchy, which is the monastery. So you're adding this position of abbot. And again, very problematic, because it means that there is no such position in the ancient texts of Buddhism. And not only is it problematic, but this Thai Sangha Act here, it actually gives very strong powers to this abbot. Yeah. So Article 38, next article here, gives us the actual powers that an abbot has according to this Sangha Act. The abbot's governing powers is as follows. He is to forbid a bhikkhu, samanera, or layman to live in his monastery without his permission. So you have to have the permission of the abbot to stay in the monastery. Yeah. So if the abbot doesn't like your face, okay, he can tell you to leave at any time. Yeah. Or if you want to come in, but the idea in ancient Buddhism is the idea that a monastery is a place for anyone who wants to come. If you are a monastic and you kind of want to go to a particular monastery, normally you will be welcome. There is no reason why people should be excluded, unless there is no space in that monastery. Yeah, then of course you have to kind of go somewhere else. Or you have done something very bad, which is against the regulations of the Sangha. But there is no basis for excluding people from a monastery. If someone comes along and they are the right kind of monk or nun, they should be included in the Sangha of that monastery. This is how it traditionally works. But here, you're giving very powerful authority to the abbot to basically exclude anyone the abbot doesn't like. It doesn't say anything about nuns, so maybe nuns can go to monasteries and say, hey, I want to stay here. I think that's all right. Maybe the nuns are excluded, bhikkhus, samaneras, and laymen. So I think maybe as a nun, you have a loophole here. You can get through this. Anyway. So he can order any disobedient bhikkhu, samanera, or layman to go out. I guess that means to leave the monastery. Yeah, you can expel them. If any bhikkhu, samanera, or layman in the monastery is disobedient to the order, to his order, in other words, whatever he says, you have to follow it, you have to be obedient, that is in conformity with the discipline of the order or the rules and regulations of the council of the elders. So this is looking a bit like the Catholic Church again. That the Catholic Church, you have a vow of obedience to the abbot or to the hierarchy. And here again, you have to be obedient to the abbot. If you're not, this is kind of the rule that Ajahn Brahmali is dreaming about, isn't it? He wants to have a power of the kind of the obedience of the Sangha when he's just joking around. So you have to be obedient. If you're not obedient, then again, you can be asked to leave the monastery. Yeah. Of course, that obedience has to be within the discipline of the order, which makes sense. Still, it leaves a lot of power to the abbot in these cases. Okay, I'm just going to Go to the next one. So this one here, Article 44. Now we're coming a little bit away from the hierarchy. Let's just maybe stay with the hierarchy a little bit. Yeah, actually, no, let me carry on. I'll come back to that later on here. Article 44, whoever charges the order of the Sangha of Thailand with an accusation that could produce disgrace or discord. Yeah, so if you charge or Thailand with an accusation that could produce disgrace or discord. In other words, if you catch the Sangha in some kind of wrongdoing, yeah, I mean, if you accuse them of something which is kind of completely made up, of course, then it's bad. But what if you accuse the Sangha hierarchy of some kind of wrongdoing, some kind of problem? Yeah, arguably you're producing disgrace or discord. Yeah, if you charge as a very senior monastic or whatever with some kind of bad conduct, even if it is true, arguably you're producing disgrace and discord. This is a very open way of saying that disgrace and discord is not really acceptable. You can be punished with a fine of not more than 5,000 baht or an imprisonment of not more than 1 year or both. So you can go to prison if you produce disgrace or discord. Yeah, and
Ajahn, does that apply to the lay community?
This is specifically for the Sangha. Whether it applies to lay community, I don't know. It could very well do, but that would be a separate law somewhere. This is the legal situation for the Sangha as such. So,
How would they pay a fine? Sorry.
how do they pay fine? Well, because they have money. I guess they have money, yeah. Okay. Or they get the lay people to support them, or whatever. Yeah.
If you went to prison, you could still remain a bhikkhu or a samana?
Well, they said before that if you are, if the police catches you because of a crime, then you are disrobed. So normally they would be disrobed, I guess, for a crime. So
the
yeah.
More than you're suggesting.
Probably, yeah, probably. Yeah, I don't know if the police always. Maybe there are some exceptions to for the police disrobing you. That's right, exactly. It gets worse and worse, right? The more you think about it, the worse it gets. So you would basically, I don't know when I saw that, he was suggesting, well, if the police is going to be corrupt, of course you can pay the police off and you might be able to stay as a monk. So if you have a lot of money as a monk, you can do lots of bad things so you can pay off the police. You can see how dodgy this whole thing ends up being. Yeah. So yeah, so so anyway, you can see the problems. I'm not going to carry on too much more. This is an amendment to the Sangha Act in 2018. The amendment places the power to appoint and remove all the 20 members of the Sangha Council, the highest authority of the governing body in the Thai Buddhist order. Yeah, who do you think gets that power? Under the king's power. Yeah, the king now, not only does he appoint the Sangha Raja, the patriarch, he appoints every one of the 20 members of the Sangha Council. So his power is expanded by the 2018 Act. Now, I just want to talk just very briefly about how bad this is, because again, I want to make the point that when you have a hierarchy, and when that hierarchy confers you with status, confers you with power, confers you with material gains, confers you with all the kind of things, all the worldly things that everyone wants, yeah, under the kind of monastic robes or under the kind of the veneer of the Vinaya, the veneer, what it is to be a monastic, very often a lot of worldly defilements are still there in the vast majority of monastics. There are small, tiny minority of monastics have no worldly desires at all. And if you make it very convenient for ordinary monastics to accrue that kind of worldly power, which everyone wants, which is just under the surface waiting to sprout out, they will jump at the opportunity very often. And that is why these kind of hierarchies are so powerful, because people will be attracted. They want to go there. They want these kind of things. And then they get trapped by the status and by the power of this whole organization. And this is why it is such a powerful way of controlling things. And one of the ways they do this, of course, is by handing out titles to monastics. Yeah, I'm sure. Do you have titles in the Tibetan tradition as well?
Not handed out by the government.
Handed out by the Sangha?
No.
So do you have that kind of thing, or do you? Not really? Yeah. 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 Do you have that in the Bhutanese tradition? You have yeah? Titles, okay. So you have like a hierarchy and certain people have certain positions and things, yeah? Yeah.
It's a title for this society.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really something is if the government doesn't control this kind of things, then it will become a political or something. So when we, as monastic sites, we don't allow to do some boarding or some things in getting. So that way we have something positions category.
Don't allow the monks to become politicians?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, yes, okay.
So that's what they are controlling.
Okay, all right. So, but there is hierarchies anyway, and then those hierarchies are, yeah. So the way it works in Thailand is that you get a position, you get a title, yeah, and these titles are called things like Somdet, Chao Kun, Pra Kru. And so these titles often go with these positions. Yeah? So if you have a position like district ecclesiastical chief, you're often Chao Kun. And Chao Kun is a bit like bishop or something like that. And Pra Kru is a lower title. Somdet is like almost like is a bit like cardinal in the Catholic Church. And these titles are very sought after. Yeah? People want these titles. They want to be Chao Kun. And you even get a small salary when you become these things. Yeah, that's kind of the weird thing. So you get a salary from the government in Thailand. Okay, now you're Chao Kun. Here is 5,000 baht a month or whatever it is. So very, very sought after. And what is interesting is that even within the forest tradition, because the Thai forest tradition is traditionally the rebellious tradition, where you go away from all of these worldly things and you try to establish yourself according to the real original practice of Buddhism. There too, these things are sought after. Yeah. So when someone like Ajahn Brahm became Chao Kun in Thailand, it's a very kind of high title. People say, yeah, Ajahn Brahm is Chao Kun. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, and people are really proud of Ajahn Brahm because he's a Chao Kun. And when you speak to monks within the forest tradition in Thailand, they talk about these things. Yeah, so-and-so becomes a Chao Kun. So-and-so has the potential to becoming Chao Kun. If you do such and such, you might become a Chao Kun. Yeah. So you can see that even the parts of the Thai Sangha, which are supposed to be pure and supposed to be above these things, there too, these things are creeping in and becoming part of the idea, because these are things they kind of speak to the very root defilements of the human mind, things that are very deeply embedded in us as human beings. And if you allow those things to grow, it doesn't take long before they take over. And sometimes you need very powerful people with real spiritual insight to be able to withstand those things and say, okay, I'm not interested, I don't care about these things. What I'm after is real spiritual insight. So these things are really problematic, and they make inroads into even the purest parts of the Sangha. And this is why it is so problematic. And that's why we should never really think that anyone is above these things. We should never worship any individual to the point where we think that they are above these kind of things, because it's very, very hard to know sometimes. Just to end off this session, and I'm going to end off in a second, we've been going for a long time already, I just wanted to give some of the rationale behind this kind of Sangha Act. And the rationale is given in the Sangha Act itself. There's a note at the very end of the Sangha Act, and it is as follows. The reason for the enactment of this act is that the administration of the order of the Sangha should not be based on the process of decentralization for the sake of balance of power, as it has been intended so far. So what this is saying, I think, it's not entirely clear what it's saying, but what I think it is saying is that so far the Buddha Sangha has been very decentralized. Every monastery has been in charge of its own things, yeah? And what it is saying here is that this act is we don't really value that decentralization anymore. We don't care about that decentralization. So we're going to centralize the whole thing to bring things under control. That's basically what this is saying here. Such a practice being detrimental to the effective dispensation. Yeah, dispensation probably means sasana, to the effective sasana, the effective religion. In other words, decentralization is not effective. That's the argument. it is found advisable to introduce an amendment so that the patriarch, as head of the bigger community, can exercise his power through the law of the country and the discipline of the order. You want to use the power of the patriarch, in other words, to keep people in line, yeah? Thereby promoting the progress and prosperity of Buddhism. So this is the idea behind this, and this is always the idea. Always the idea of any hierarchy is always the rationale is we want to look after Buddhism. We want to make sure that no monasteries, no individuals behave in the wrong way. So we create a system to keep everyone in place. That is always the rationale behind these hierarchies. But the problem is that there's twofold problem. First of all, hierarchies bring with them a large number of problems of their own. Yeah. The second thing is it might very well be that this decentralized structure has its own way of regulating itself. Yeah, and we'll talk about that afterwards, how that might happen. And thirdly, and the most important point of all, is that the Buddha established a decentralized structure. There must be a reason for that. Yeah, and this is kind of to me, the ultimate and the most important point of all, that the Buddha established these things. If the Buddha established these things, we should assume that this is the right way of doing things and not try to overrule the Buddha and create something which is superior to the Buddha because the Buddha didn't really understand, so we have to override what he did. To me, that is very problematic. Anyway, so I'm just saying that just to keep in mind that when people say, oh, the hierarchy, we need that to control, we need to kind of make sure everyone is in line, don't buy that argument, because that argument is actually very dangerous and it often leads to far more problems than it actually resolves. And this is what is at stake here. Okay, so let's have a break here. Yeah, and we can come back after break, we can have some questions or whatever if you like, but let's maybe take a 10 or 15-minute break. So we meet back again in 10 minutes enough for everyone? Or do you want to have a longer break? Yeah, 10 minutes? Okay, so let's come back 9:15 then. So 9:05 now, 9:15. Just a chance to use the toilet or whatever you like. Okay. Yeah.
So I guess two things happened. One, in 2011, I think, the Dalai Lama separated that Dalai Lama role from the political role.
Right. Yeah.
He stood down from that and moved that aside.
Mm.
So the Tibetan government in exile. But actually, His Holiness Dalai Lama does appoint the heads of the big monasteries, the major monasteries, the abbots there. Yeah, I was just saying that His Holiness Dalai Lama does appoint the heads of the major monasteries. And I think the head of the Ganden Tripa, which is the head of the Gelugpa tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, and that's shared between two different colleges. And so it alternates between one to the other. So it's sort of like there's a progression up those roles. So they're appointed roles. So yes,
what kind of power? What is the role of those leaders of the Gelugpa tradition? What is their role?
The Ganden Tripa. I'm not sure. Ganden Tripa, what role? Ganden Tripa. Oh, well, you're in a different tradition. You can't say.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. I mean, it is a spiritual role, but I don't know apart from that what sort of decision making they have. It's not like we get decrees about thou shalt not, or anything like that. I think more spiritual role. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. But that's as well. You don't get those decrees. Okay. Okay. Venerable Soma. We can decline, but it's normally not done. And I think people would kind of wonder, what's wrong with you declining this position? You can decline. It's not kind of compulsory to take it on board. And I think Ajahn Brahm was, when he was offered it, did he ever consider declining? Not really, because I think, one of the reasons why he accepted it was because of in the Thai community, it's considered a very high prestige to get these kind of things. And the Thai community is very happy. Our Ajahn Brahm is getting it, yay, right? Because you identify that whole tradition. So you feel good about it when your abbot kind of gets this kind of things. So he did it. I think he did. I think, to be honest, I think Ajahn Brahm couldn't care less, to be absolutely honest. I know Ajahn Brahm very well. I don't think he cares. But he does it because he thinks it's good for other people, basically. Yeah. So, but if there are monks I know who might decline these kind of things. I know. I'm not going to mention any names, but there are some very rebellious monks who would rather not have these kind of things. Yeah. Venerable Seri, do you have any questions? No, you're right. Venerable from Bhutan. I can't remember. I've forgotten your name already. I'm not going to try. I'm just going to. Yeah.
Forgive me being mischievous on governance. If some of the construct of the very act was corrupt, or said, they made an argument there around decentralization, but really it was trying to bring more constraints. Mm-hmm. So do you say guide yourself carefully in terms of looking at that and saying, okay, that's the present construction, but be careful how you apply it? Because, you've given examples already where there is an act, but there's a fair amount of corruption, and it also leads to further defilements. And the very gestation of the act came from a place of saying, centralize power and put constraints in place, but actually have people fight over each other to be a Sangha, or here's a bit of money for you, or we can make you look good as an abbot. So trying to get that balance right, that it comes down to some extent to your own practice and saying, am I in that governance model or not?
Right. Yeah. I think that there are many people who don't get very corrupted by the system. I think that's obviously the case. But the concern is that you are,
sometimes self-censor, as I said before. Sometimes you don't dare to make those changes that really need to be made. And a classic example is the bhikkhuni ordination thing. Yeah, the whole of Thai society basically cannot really move because of this hierarchical structure. There's no independence at the grassroots, so you can't make any changes. But of course, it's happening anyway because the bhikkhuni sangha is not acknowledged within the Sangha Act. It means that it's free of all these constraints, which is kind of the paradox here. So the bhikkhus can do whatever they want. They're not recognized, but who cares? Maybe it's better not to be recognized sometimes. But I think you're right. There are certainly people. I mean, Ajahn Shah, he was a Cha Kun, yeah, and he was part of the system in that sense. But he was also very outspoken, and he would do things that were, he would do things his own way, and he wasn't afraid of the system. So there is a bit of both. I mean, I'm not saying that this leads to absolute corruption, but it does lead to a certain limit on people, for sure. Yeah.
So we're very proud of the bhikkhuni ordination, and supporting
All the nuns in all traditions. If someone in Thailand then spoke out against the bhikkhuni ordination, that's the instrument by which punishment could be meted out, I guess, then.
Yeah. This and there are further laws as well, because these laws allow the Sangha hierarchy to lay down laws and regulations. And I don't know where they are kept or where they are, written down, but somewhere they are kept, and we don't even know what they are. But through the system, all these things punishment is meted out, as it say here. Meting out punishment sounds pretty ominous. Was there anything from online, Barada? You said something about universal application. Was that a question from online? Was it your question? That was your question. Okay, yeah. Of course, it doesn't have universal application, Thai law, but the point is that most countries have something similar or parallel, in one way or another. So even though Thai law itself is not really applicable, and in Australia, I mean, is it applicable? Well, if we consider us part of the Thai Sangha, it kind of is applicable to us. But if we consider us not part of the Thai Sangha, well, then it isn't. So it is one of those questions: to what extent are we part of the Thai Sangha or not? And it's kind of hard to really. I would say this is a law, a secular law. It cannot really apply to anyone outside of Thailand, in my opinion, because it is a law which is bounded by the borders of Thailand, as far as I can tell. But, yeah, well, I think that's. I mean, does that? I guess it depends on what deal you're making in accepting that title, and I guess that is the point. What does that title say? Does it say? I think it says something. I promise to uphold the something. Yeah. So to that extent, you're making a promise, but I don't think it's legally enforceable, but it is morally probably to some extent enforceable. Yeah. Mm.
Everybody's happy online.
We're happy online. Okay.
Santi's there, Newbury's there, Damaso.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so we have looked at one example of a hierarchy, and I just want to very briefly. Is it a bit too loud? I can hear some feedback there. And so I want to just very briefly again just have a look at why hierarchies are so problematic. Yeah, what are the problems? And these are problems that are accepted in academia to some extent. Yeah, so hierarchies are known to have problems associated with them, and probably especially in religious institutions. So why are they so problematic? What are the things? So hierarchies, what they really are, they are power structures. Yeah, where power comes from the hierarchy. That's kind of the essence of what a hierarchy is. And the fact that it is a power structure has certain problems associated with it. Tend to intimidate and stifle communication across the various layers of the hierarchy. This is well known apparently in management science, and management science, they often talk about reducing hierarchies because it tends to lead to problems within companies and organizations. And as I mentioned before, this can be even worse within religious organizations because of the additional respect and way we treat each other within these groups. So this is a big problem, and we want to have communication, because when we have communication, well, we can talk about things, we can bring up issues. If there is abuse going on, you want to talk about that abuse, otherwise it leads to incredible problems. And we have seen around the Buddhist world how abuse has been hushed up. And because it has been hushed up, it's been kept going for a long, long time after when it should have been sorted out. It leads to control of groups and people. And because the hierarchy has all the tools to control, and because the hierarchy represents powers that are not necessarily Buddhist, it represents here because of the king and the country, and the law is above the Sangha. It means that it represents secular and worldly values very often. So worldly values become very important. What does the state want? What is important for the Thai state? What is the national identity in Thailand? What is what are the broader aims of governance in Thailand that will also then somehow be blended into the Sangha and the hierarchy? So you control the Sangha to make it kind of fit with the larger aims of society. And one of the things that we saw this, I'm just talking about the ordination of nuns that we had back here in 2009. And Venerable Sarah, you were there, you were one of those nuns ordained in 2009, a very famous ordination. Yeah. And that is where you saw precisely that problem of control, because you saw straight away when we did that, we were kind of thrown out, of that fraternity, or that grouping of monasteries known as Wat Pa Pong. So once you're part of a group, once you're part of a hierarchy, they can control you by threatening expulsion and threatening these kind of things. And I think that if we had been told beforehand that you will be, or we had known beforehand that we would be expelled, maybe it wouldn't happen. If we had asked the lay people in Perth, well, we are going to be expelled if we ordain bhikkhunis, do you still want to go ahead? I think that would have put a big damper on the idea, and quite likely it would have been cancelled as a consequence, because it's just too traumatic, the idea of getting expelled. But then once you are expelled, and of course, then it's a different matter, and then they kind of, maybe it wasn't so traumatic after all. But this is how control works, right? You expel people, you do things to them unless they kind of play by the party line here. And then abuse may go unreported, part of this idea of stifling communication, and it just carries on under the surface. Just like we've seen in the Catholic Church, same thing is happening in Buddhism as well, things going on under the surface that are often very unwholesome, and the power relationships makes it hard for these things to come out. The next thing is the idea that hierarchies tend to corrupt. Not only do they stifle communication, enable control, but they are inherently corrupting. Monastics become worldly rather than spiritual. Hierarchies, as I said before, they bestow things on you that you want. And so you crave for those things, and you monastics get sidetracked into worldly pursuits rather than spiritual pursuits. And this is very, very common in the modern world, and I'm sure it's common in all traditions around the world. Actually, we know that that is the case. So that's just kind of recapping the problems, some of the problems with hierarchy. So the question then is, where do we go from here? What can we do to counteract this tendency? What can we do to resolve some of these issues? And the answer is, if we want to resolve issues in Buddhism, and if we're going to resolve issues in a way that is acceptable to everyone, this is what we want. We want to find some common ground, that we all can use. That's the ideal thing, because then we can apply the same principles, whether we are Mahayana, Vajrayana, Theravada, whatever it is, we can apply these principles. And so this is what we want to try, to find some principles that are valid to all. And in this case, there's only one authority all Buddhists can agree on. There's one thing that every Buddhist in the world has to agree on. What is that authority? The Buddha. No one can doubt the authority of the Buddha. So because of that, we need to ask, well, what would the Buddha do in this kind of situation? How would he resolve these issues? And the answer to that is that you have to return to the common ground for all Buddhist texts. What is that? The early Buddhist texts. And this is, what are these early Buddhist texts? And these early Buddhist texts are essentially the texts that exist in common between all the various schools. And what is fascinating, if you start to investigate the textual history of Buddhism, you look back at how the schools have diversified, how various texts came to arise, how they were written, how they were established over time, it becomes very obvious after a while that there is a root group of texts that stand behind all the rest of them. And I would really recommend to you, there's a really good book. Who was that? Yeah, the good book called The Authenticity of the Early Buddhist Texts. Yeah, it's a really nice book. Yeah, can't remember the author right now, but and this was it's a nice book, because what we do there, we summarize all the evidence for what is the earliest Buddhist text, and we show a little bit of the historical development and these kind of things. And it was published, I have to say, I have to brag a little bit, published by the Oxford Center for Buddhist Studies. So it's kind of considered a good text to be read and to understand what is the earliest part of Buddhism. So these early Buddhist texts, if there's anything at all we know comes from the Buddha, these are the texts that come from the Buddha. And if you look at those early Buddhist texts, you will see that the principles that they expound are the same, are principles that are found in all Buddhist traditions. Yeah, Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, mindfulness of breathing. Yeah, these are the things that any Buddhist tradition will talk about. So this is the common core of Buddhism. And of course, part of that common core is the text on the Vinaya, the conduct, the discipline, the regulations that actually are binding on the monastic order, are part of these early texts. So if we're going to find any kind of agreement among monastics in the world, this is where we have to go. So the question then arises, well, what do these early texts say? If we agree that these are the texts we can all use to find ways of regulating the Sangha in a good way, overcoming some of these problems, what do we find in this Buddha text? Yeah. So here we are. So this is what we find, and this is just a summary just to start us off. And I'm going to talk about each of these things in quite a bit of detail. Governance according to the EBTs. Here are some of the important issues. There's no leader after the Buddha dies. Yeah, so here we have a straight quote from the very same EBTs. And this is from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the sutta just soon before the Buddha passed away. If there's anyone who thinks, I'll take charge of the Sangha of monastics, or the Sangha of monastics is meant for me, let them make a statement regarding the Sangha. This is the Buddha speaking, by the way. As it was said, if anyone thinks this, well, let them look after it, yeah? And then the Buddha says, but the realized one, in other words, himself, yeah, the Tathagata, does not think like this. So the Buddha doesn't think in terms of any leadership after the Buddha. And we shall see very shortly why that is the case. And the reason why it is the case is, of course, because it is the suttas and the promulgations of the Buddha that he made during his lifetime, that is the teaching after the Buddha passes away, not some new, top monk who is going to kind of look after the whole thing. Yeah? And this is a very important point because it means that in Buddhism, everyone, every single person, even the kind of people we might consider enlightened in the present day, everyone comes after the Buddha. The Buddha is really, if there is a hierarchy, you can say the Buddha is on top. But because the Buddha is dead, it's kind of a nice hierarchy. Yeah, it's kind of all these texts that are there, they provide the hierarchy. No one is above the Buddha. The Buddha comes first. And it means, what that means in practice is that when we are dealing with the word of the Buddha, when we are dealing with deciding what we should follow, we should always take the word of the Buddha before anything else. So every tradition has its commentaries. Every tradition has its ideas on how we should live the monastic life, what the Vinaya is, what we should be doing. But in all those traditions, what we're doing should come under what the Buddha was talking about. So very important, because what that means that the principles I'm going to talk about afterwards, they are the principles, according to the Buddha himself, that we should be following, not other principles. That's why the Thai Sangha law sometimes, and all these laws are sometimes a bit unfortunate because they go against that principle very often. Yeah. So the whole idea of lineages and patriarchies, we need to remember, if you're going to have lineages and patriarchies, we should remember those lineages and patriarchies, they are, again, come under the Buddha. The Dhamma Vinaya is to be the teacher. The Dhamma are the early Buddhist texts, the suttas that we have from the earliest period. The Vinaya is the regulations, monastic regulations laid down by the Buddha. They are to be your teacher. So again, quoting from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, now some of you might think the teacher's dispensation has passed. Now we have no teacher. You can imagine at the time the Buddha was just passing away and everyone was up in arms. They were rolling on the ground, crying, holding their tummy while rolling back and forth. That's actually what it says in the suttas. I'm just quoting from the suttas there. And they were rolling back and forth, crying, oh no, the teacher is gone. What can we do? You might think the teacher has passed. We have no teacher. But no, you should not see it like this. The teaching and training that I have taught and pointed out for you shall be your teacher after my passing. Teaching and training is Dhamma and Vinaya, is a translation here by Bhante Sujato. That is your teacher after my passing. This is where we should go. And so what does that mean? And what it means, it does not mean that we cannot have any other teachers. That would be taking it way too far. Of course, you can have other teachers as well. But what it means is that the final authority always rests with the Buddha himself and what he has laid down. So this is this idea of final authority that is important. It doesn't mean that we cannot listen to, well, in our case, I suppose, Ajahn Brahmali. It doesn't mean you cannot listen to Lama so-and-so. It doesn't mean you cannot listen to whoever it is that has a certain authority, Ayah so-and-so, whatever it is. But it means that if there is a conflict, if there is a problem, then the priority should always be the word of the Buddha. That's really all it means. So that is the teacher, And this is, I think, the right way of interpreting this, because obviously we need teachers apart from the Buddha in the present world. And then the Buddha says, so Ananda, be your own island, your own refuge, with no other refuge. Let the teaching be your island and your refuge, with no other refuge. The teaching is your refuge, no other refuge. In the final analysis, the real refuge is the Dhamma and Vinaya, not your teacher. This is quite radical in some traditions. If you look around the world, the vast majority of people take their teacher as their refuge. It's a very, very common thing in the Buddhist world. I know it is common in the Mahayana tradition. Your refuge is your teacher. It is also very common in Theravada. It is very common to have no idea what is in the suttas, what is in the Vinaya, and your teacher is everything there is. That is your island. That is your refuge. So this is a large problem in the Buddhist world. When actually we should really go to the suttas. And you can see the problem here, right? The problem here is that, well, you have to read the suttas to know these things. And because people don't read the suttas, well, they don't know, so they take the teachers as their refuge. You can see the problem that arises from having no idea what is going on in the suttas. So it becomes kind of self-fulfilling. Once you don't read the suttas, well, that's it. You've had it because you have no access to these things. I should also say that in the end, having your own refuge and your own island actually means the 4 satipatthanas. That's what it comes after this. So in other words, your meditation practice is really your ultimate refuge, according to this. Okay, so governance according to the EBTs. So just let me so that was the summary. We're just so we have first of all the fact that there is no hierarchy. So now we are in the early Buddhist text. Now we're talking about how the Buddha envisaged the Sangha to operate. And now we want to compare this with what we saw before, the Thai Sangha, the Thai hierarchy, compared to how it is in the early Buddhist text. And one of the kind of astonishing things in the early Buddhist text is that there is no hierarchy. Of course, that is perhaps not entirely true, because the Buddha obviously was, at that time, he was very, very powerful. And if there was a problem in the Sangha, people would go to the Buddha. And the Buddha was like the Sangha Raja, if you like, at that time. So in that sense, there was a kind of a hierarchy. But in reality, the way the monasteries were run, they were always run independently at that time. Each monastery was in charge of itself. And within that monastery, there was no hierarchy within the monastery. There was a democracy within the monastery. We'll see in a second how this actually operated. So there's no hierarchy really whatsoever. You may ask, what about seniority? Doesn't seniority count for something? And it does. Seniority is actually also part. It matters. Yeah, seniority has a certain effect in the Sangha, and it's important to take that into account as well. But in the end, there is really no hierarchy. In the end, everyone is treated as the same within the early Sangha, and we shall see how that actually works. So no hierarchy, which includes no abbots, because abbots is kind of the final layer of hierarchy in this large kind of pyramidical structures, or whatever it's called. So if there is no hierarchy and there are no abbots, then what does that mean for decision-making? And what it means is that decision-making is decentralized. Everything is decentralized. Everything happens at the local level. And there are some very great advantages of having local level decision-making rather than having decision-making at the top. So everything is decentralized. And to make that decentralized structure work, you also have what is called delegated authority. So if you just have a decentralized structure, but you have no delegated authority, the whole thing's become really unwieldy, because it means that everyone has to be part of everything. That doesn't really work. So you also have delegated authority, where you confer authority in a certain area on an individual, and then they have to come back to the Sangha to make sure that they do their job in a way that is accepted by the Sangha, who gives them the delegated authority. So let us now come to how this decision-making actually happens. If there is no hierarchy, if there are no abbots, and decision-making is made through a decentralized structure called Sangha Kamma, how does this actually work? What do we mean by Sangha Kamma? And we're going to look at the principles of Sangha Kamma, and how they actually, how it is affected. So the first principle of Sangha Kamma is that everyone in the monastery has to be present. So Sangha Kamma is any decision made by the Sangha, and for the decision-making to be valid, I'm talking about the validity here. It's not that they have to be present in kind of as an idea. Actually, the validity of the Sangha Kamma depends on everyone being present. And this is very powerful, right? I mean, this is kind of similar to the idea you have in Australia, whereby everyone has a vote, similar to that. And so it's a very powerful thing, because it means, of course, if everyone has to be there, no one is actually left out. Everyone either you have to say nay or yay to the decisions that are made, and it means that you never really left out of what is happening. You know what is going on in the monastery, and everyone is part of the community. There is an interesting passage in the Pali Canon. There's a monk called Mahakappina is his name. And he has a bit of an interesting background, but he was supposedly an arahant, and he was sitting in his kuti, in his little hut far away in the forest somewhere, enjoying his seclusion. He was thinking, should I go to the Sangha Kamma or should I not? Should I go to the Uposatha or should I not go to the Uposatha? And he thinks, well, regardless, I'm an arahant, I'm fully enlightened, whether I go to Sangha Kamma, what difference does it make? I'm still enlightened anyway, so who cares? And his mind inclines not to go to the Sangha Kamma. And then according to the story, the Buddha reads his mind, and the Buddha kind of instantly disappears, and reappears in the presence of Mahakappina. This is how the Buddha kind of does his kind of magical tricks at that time. It's not really magic, but it's how the Buddha does things. And then he tells Mahakappina, he says that you should. He said specifically, if you don't go to the Sangha Kammas, who is going to go? You are an arahant. You are a leader of the Sangha. If the leaders of the Sangha don't go to the Sangha Kammas, who is going to go? So he tells him specifically, you have to go to the Sangha Kamma. So he goes, So this is this idea that everyone should be present. So everyone is part of the decision-making. And the leaders of the Sangha should be the first to be part of these meetings, so as to encourage everyone else to be part of it. So how do we decide who is part of the same monastery? The Pali word here for monastery is avasa. It's what in Thai. Is it what? Yeah. Anyway, it's avasa. And so you have a boundary, right? And the boundary is established by the Sangha itself. So you decide kind of who is included in the boundary. But the normal way it is established is that the monastery, there will be a certain number of people who congregate, who belong to kind of a community, and they will then have maybe a hall together like we have in the monastery here, like in the Posata hall, where we do ordination ceremonies with Chanta Patimokkha, and then the community that kind of relies on those central facilities, that kind of becomes a community. Yeah? And then you draw a boundary around that. That becomes the Sima. And so that is how you decide who is part of the same monastery. And these are officially sanctioned, or these are boundaries that are made by the Sangha itself. So they are through an official act of the Sangha. And then if anyone who is within that boundary has to come to these meetings. So if you are absent one day, maybe you are traveling somewhere, and the Sangha will make decisions in your absence. If there is a visiting monastic coming to your monastery, they also have to be allowed to be part of that community, right? So they will also be part of the action of the Sangha Kamma. Anyone who is present in a monastery, you cannot keep anyone out. And this is a very, very strict requirement in the Vinaya. It's a requirement that if any person is not present for a Sangha Kamma, the Sangha Kamma itself is invalid. Everyone has to be there. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And this is regardless of who they are. You cannot say to someone, well, you are just visiting. Yeah, you don't really fully part of our community. And because you're just visiting, sorry, you can't be part of this. Actually, no, it's the other way around. They have to be part of it, even though they are just visiting for a day. The only exception to this is if you have a good reason not to be present, and then you can give your chanda, we can give your consent to decisions being made in your absence. Yeah, this is kind of the idea behind this. So this creates a community feeling, where everyone is part of the decisions, everyone feels heard, everyone has a chance to speak up, as long as it's not too intimidating to be in these meetings. Maybe you feel intimidated by the senior monastic, which would be very unfortunate, but that might happen. But at least in theory, you have the possibility to speak up at these meetings when these decisions are being made. So what kind of decisions should be made by the Sangha? Not every decision can be made by the Sangha. What kind of decision should be made? And I would say in general, any decision that affects the Sangha as a community is a Sangha matter, whereas things that affect individual monastics only are then to be decided by individuals. There isn't any clear boundaries here. It's hard sometimes to draw the boundaries, but that is essentially what it is about. So Sangha issues should be dealt with. We'll come back to this later on because it's a tricky problem to decide exactly what the Sangha should decide and what it shouldn't. This is the idea of simas, of boundaries around the monastery. There's a lot of rules about simas in the Vinaya, and that is just a very brief overview. I don't really want to talk too much in detail because this might vary a little bit depending on what tradition you're in, exactly what rules apply. But do you have simas in the Mahayana tradition as well? Do you have these things? Do you have simas? Do you have boundaries that you draw up and all the monks have to be present at meetings and these kind of things? Or do you?
We try.
You try?
But I was just thinking that in terms of...
Do you want to use a microphone, Venerable? Because people might hear you.
We do have that I can only speak from Chenrezig Nuns community in terms of the meetings and everyone participating and so forth for things affecting Sangha as a whole. But the boundary one has been interesting because I think there's no clarity there because it's there's also lay residents and there's the nunneries community, but then there are also nuns who live below. So I don't think the clarity for the whole centre around the boundary is very clear, I have to say. We could say the whole property. we probably, yeah, you would say the whole property. There are usually, you know, as part of your consecration of the abode, there's the boundary setting as part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very common these days to, at the time of the Buddha, the boundaries would be around whole monasteries, and there would be an official Sangha Kamma itself, an action of the Sangha, which decides exactly what the boundary is. So you have markers that bounds the whole thing. You say, oh, that mountain, yeah, and that tree, and that kind of thorny bush or whatever. And you should use markers that are fairly not so impermanent, yeah. So a thorny bush and a flower is not ideal for a marker. So using that are reasonably permanent. But even an anthill is actually mentioned as a possible marker in the Vinaya, and anthills are fairly impermanent, right? They don't last that long necessarily. Yeah. But so that was how it was established. You had these large semas with markers around it, and the markers were read out, and then you decided the boundary on that basis. But later on in Theravada Buddhism, they started using what they call small semas, the semas which were just like the walls of a hall, for example. So only the inside of the hall was within the boundary. Yeah. And that had the advantage of knowing exactly who was there and who wasn't there. Yeah, so anyone who was there could do it. It also had some big disadvantages. The big disadvantage is that it no longer meant that everyone in the monastery had to be present. Only those who were inside the hall had to be present, because now that was the boundary. But the original purpose of the boundary was precisely to include everyone, right? So it kind of takes away some of the original point of the Sangha Kamma. Of course, in practice, what you do, you still ask everyone to be there, but it loses that sense of, you no longer invalidate the Sangha Kamma if no one is there. So it loses some of the formality or the power of that idea of sima. So, yeah.
Ajahn, there's a call on from Venerable Veronica and Santi.
Okay.
Ajahn, one thing is you use the word everyone. So I just wanted to see whether it's good to mention who this everyone is for people who may not be clear, that you mean the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis, right? It doesn't include the lay people or the anagarikas or the samaneras or the samaneris, isn't it?
You can't hear.
You have one already. Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very loud and clear.
Can you hear me? Okay. I just wanted to know whether it's helpful to mention who you mean by everyone. You mean by everyone the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis, right? Because if somebody's not familiar, they might think that it means all the people there, like lay people, anagarikas, samaneras and samaneris, which are not the decision-making bodies. I just wanted to make that comment just in case. The other one was you, during the presentation, you used the word the leaders should be there with respect to Venerable Kapina, but we were talking about no hierarchy. I was wondering who you were referring to as leaders should be there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is the thing. There's always a bit of tension between the idea of flat structures and seniority. There still is seniority in Buddhism. There's still a respect for people who have in a special position. And this is always a little bit of a tension. I think part of the problem is that when we don't find that right balance between leadership and democracy in our institutions, that balance can be very hard to find. Yeah, I mean, this is human nature seems to be to go to extremes. We always go to extremes. Either we practice all the ascetic practices or we become embroiled in sensual pleasures, and finding that middle way is so hard very often. And you can see how your own mind sometimes kind of jumps between these things. And that is also true with, I think, leadership and democracy. It is hard to find that balance very often. Actually, I want to talk about it. I'm going to come back to this later on, because the suttas and the Vinaya do talk about leadership. And so I'm going to get back to that idea later on afterwards and kind of discuss that, finding that balance at least a little bit. But also the idea of everyone being present. Maybe that was not a very good formulation on my part. And again, I want to make clear exactly what is meant by everyone here. And everyone just means the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. Yeah. So anyone who is not a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni is not actually bound by these rules. And if you are like a samaneri or a 10 precept nun or whatever, very often you may take part in the meeting, but you're not officially allowed to object to the decisions that are being made. Decisions are really only made by the Bhikkhu Sangha or the Bhikkhuni Sangha, depending on the monastery that you are in. And even that is not quite true, yeah, because it depends on whether you are a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni sangha of the same community. There are different communities. And this is the idea of sangvasa. Sangvasa literally means living together. It means a community, really. And if you are different sangvasa, if you consider yourself, for example, that your Vinaya is very different, not practicing the same Vinaya, for example, that's one of the examples of different sangvasa, can also mean views. You have very different views about the Dhamma or whatever. If that distinguishes you too much, then you don't have that living together. And because you don't have the living together, you don't function as a single community. And that is another important point. But this is this idea of sangvasa, or whether you belong to the same community or not, is actually a very difficult one. And it depends on, historically, has there been schisms in the Sangha historically? It's a very interesting question. Are we actually living in a schismatic Sangha? Are the people in the Tibetan tradition, are you schismatic from the people in the Theravada tradition? Are we separated through a schism? I'm not saying you are schismatic, I'm saying there has been some schism in history. And the answer is it's very uncertain. And those people who have tried to look at the historical record to find out whether there has been any real schism in the Sangha, the answer is actually probably not. Yeah, there is no real historical record of any actual schisms. It seems like we have kind of drifted apart a little bit. Yeah, and you've gone to the north, we've gone to the south, and then after a while, the way we taught Buddhism became a bit different as a consequence of historical evolution and geographic realities and the cultural realities in different areas. And then somehow we ended up with slightly different teachings. But there is no real evidence of schism. And as long as there is no evidence of schism, well, we can, in theory, operate together. So if we have a Mahayana monk, for example, coming to our monastery, what we will do, we will say, well, we have no reason to think that we are schismatic, yeah, because there is no evidence in history. Are you practicing the same rules as we are doing? And if they say, well, yes, I'm practicing the same rules, yeah, then you can come to the Patimokkha ceremony if you like, because we are practicing the same rules. We are essentially of the same sangvasa because we're practicing in the same way. Could also argue, yeah, this is also arguable the case, that even if they are not normally practicing the same rules, but you're practicing the same rules while you are staying with us, yeah, then that actually is good enough, because you are, at that time, you are on the same sangvasa. And that may be sufficient to allow people to practice together. So, yeah, so that is what is meant by community. Same sangvasa, same group, and only applying to monastics. And if there are lay people within that boundary, no problem at all. As many lay people in that boundary as they want to, as long as you are, as long as all the monastics are gathered together to make decisions. That is the important point. Okay, so then the idea of everyone being present, and a very important part of that is that everyone has the right to object to a decision. Yeah, and so it means that decisions are only passed if there is unanimity. And very important principle of Sangha Kamma. So, for example, one of the typical Sangha Kammas, I'll have a look at that later on, is the Sangha Kamma for the ordination procedure. If one person objects to someone being ordained, you can't ordain them. Yeah, you've had it basically. That's it. You are not going to be part of the Sangha as a consequence. And this is a very powerful way of making decisions, that we have unanimity, because it means that no one feels left out. It means that everyone has a chance to be heard. Yeah, if there is a real problem, you are heard. And so it's a very, very powerful thing. And especially if we make Sangha Kammas, we make decisions on controversial topics. Controversial topics could be things like where we're going to spend money, if we're going to build more kutis. I was just talking to Ajahn Brahmali yesterday. I was saying, Ajahn, I have this topic I want to talk to you about. I want to talk about building more kutis. And he said, not now. Find some other time. So Ajahn Brahm knew this was going to be controversial, so he wasn't very keen on talking about that. And then you have a Sangha Kamma, so everyone has a chance to object. And then, of course, what happens if someone objects? You listen to the objection. You find a way of rephrasing the Sangha Kamma in such a way that everyone is hopefully happy. Yeah, everyone's objections are taken into account, and you can rephrase things, and then everyone is heard. Yeah, this is such a powerful thing because so often we don't take into account the minority views in large organizations, and this can become very painful and difficult. Can lead to kind of tiny little schisms, not real schisms, but tiny little, blocks within the monastery and this kind of stuff if you have too much of that. And another aspect of this idea of everyone being present and unanimity is that when we have a Sangha Kamma, there is not, it is the objection towards what we're doing that stops the thing from going through. It is not actually, you're not voting for things. It's not a vote saying who agrees and then you vote. What it is, it's the allowance to object against something going through. That is what it is about. And this is actually a very important distinction because there are many people who are unsure, don't really know. Okay, I don't know one way or the other, and who cares anyway? And if you don't know, then that's fine, as long as you don't object to the thing. And this is what makes this thing work, because if everyone had to agree, normally you would have complete gridlock, it wouldn't work out. It wouldn't be possible to actually run anything, you wouldn't have any decisions made. But because it is only the objection which stops the Sangha Kamma from going through, it means that it is possible very often to come to some kind of agreement. So this is quite different. And I've heard monastics say this before, I don't really agree with this, but I don't want to object either. Okay, that's no problem. It goes through, because it means you're a bit on the fence, you're kind of slightly unsure. And so this is an important point, because otherwise probably wouldn't get anything done now. So this is the first part, and I think this is maybe one of the most important aspects of Sangha Kamma, the idea that everyone has to be present. Second aspect is that the idea of the minimum size of the assembly, and this is called the quorum usually in English. And it is the idea that to make a decision, you can't just make decisions individually. You can't be the abbot and say, I'm going to make the decision for everyone else, which is normally what happens in monasteries. Actually, that is completely illegal, really. You need a quorum to make decisions, especially decisions that affect the Sangha as a whole. And the size of the quorum varies depending on the kind of Sangha Kamma you are doing. So the ordinary simple Sangha Kamma, the quorum is 4 monastics, 4 bhikkhus or 4 bhikkhunis. And then there are certain Sangha Kammas, especially the ordination ceremony, that requires 5 bhikkhus. And then there are the big, really important Sangha, not important ones, but very important ones, I suppose, like the rehabilitation after the Sangha Disesa offense, that requires a quorum of 20 bhikkhus on the bhikkhu side. But the standard size of the quorum is 4 monastics. So you can't really make a decision on anything without that quorum in place. So what do you do in monasteries where there are less than 4 monks? Well, I guess you make decisions that are more informal. You can still make decisions, but they're not binding in the same way. And they can then be redone more easily. Let's say they turn out to be wrong or whatever. Another monastic arrives when it's very easy to redo those decisions that may have turned out to be misguided or wrong, because they don't have the same formality they're not as strong as if it's made by a proper quorum of monastics. The idea is to safeguard pretty much individual power, I suppose. So that is the second way. So everyone has to be present. And the idea of unanimity of everyone, and then the idea of a minimum size, the quorum. And then the third one is that you have to follow a standard pattern in the way that the Sangha Kamma is expressed. And so what is that pattern? And one of the main ideas of the pattern is that Sangha Kamma normally consists of what you call emotion. Emotion is like a suggestion. This is what we want to do. An announcement is then announcing that suggestion afterwards. So you put the motion forward, this is what we want to do, and then you announce, well, this is what we are doing. And during the process of motion and announcement, before the whole thing is completed, that is when you can object, before the whole thing is completed. So motion announcement, then the way this is structured depends on the severity, the importance of the Sangha Kamma. If it is a very important Sangha Kamma, then you have one motion and 3 announcements. So ordination ceremony, Sangha Disesa offenses, or other kind of punishment offenses. There's not many Sangha Kammas that have a motion and 3 announcements, but there are the big ones have that. That means that you have a lot of time to consider the issue, because it is announced 3 times afterwards. And then before you come to the very end, that is when you have to make your objection. The more common way of doing things, in fact, the most common way in the Vinaya is 1 motion and 1 announcement. This is by far the most common Sangha Kamma in the Vinaya. Almost all of them are done in that way. So you put forward a motion, a suggestion, and then it is announced once. And then there are certain Sangha Kammas that only have a motion. And the typical Sangha Kamma is the Uposatha ceremony, which only has a motion. You put forward, this is what we're doing, and it kind of carries through. And when you listen, while you listen to the rule, that's when you decide whether you have committed an offense or not. And then you have the last one, which is called an Apalokana Sangha Kamma. And the Apalokana Sangha Kamma, Apalokana means like permission Sangha Kamma. You're asking for permission from the Sangha, and it is like a more informal thing, where the normal kind of structures don't really apply. You're just saying to the Sangha, okay, does then everyone agree? And then everyone agrees, and then you kind of carry it through. Now, of these 4 ways of doing Sangha Kamma, for the Sangha Kamma to be valid, you have to have the motion first and the announcement afterwards. It has to be in the right order. And number 2, it has to be the right number of motions and announcements. If it isn't, the Sangha Kamma is invalid. Actually, let's say if you have more than is required, it's not a problem. But if you have less or you have the wrong sequence, then you have a problem as a consequence. And so that is the first thing. The second thing, which is, I think, an important point here, is that the Nyati Kamma, which is the motion, the Kamma which has 1 motion, and the Apalokana Kamma, which is just the permission Sangha Kamma, these are not really found very much in the Vinaya at all. They're very rare. So if we want to make a Sangha Kamma, for example, at Bodhinyana Monastery, normally we try to follow the process of motion and announcement. I think we should probably be a bit more rigorous in how we present the Sangha Kammas, actually, because to follow this kind of process. Why? Because this is the way it seems to have been pretty much done at the time of the Buddha.
Can you say more about that, Ajahn? What do you mean about being more rigorous?
Well, I think that sometimes, I don't know if we kind of make a clear distinction between motion and announcement. I think we have roughly done that, but maybe not quite clearly enough. So this is the motion I present. Here is the announcement, and then make that very clear. And the next thing that comes up is actually the wording. The wording also has to include certain phrases and words. That's the second thing that comes up. So making sure that we have that rigorousness both in the structure and also the wording of what we're doing. So.
Is the wording the way the motion is, or just the way the announcement?
Both, yeah. So that's actually coming now, yeah. So listen now. So now's your so this is the so the standard pattern, yeah. So now comes the wording here. I'm not sure where. I think I'm just still on the summaries. I'm not sure why I'm talking about such detail. Maybe I can go through the details afterwards and in more. So the wording, I'll look at that in detail afterwards, because I want to show you an actual Sangha Kamma so you can see which aspect of the wording are important, so we know what's going on here. So this is the third one, right? The validity, the structure of the state, the standard pattern of the thing. So we have the whole community has to be present, you have the quorum, and then you have the standard pattern. And then there comes the last requirement of Sangha Kamma to be valid, and this is the validity of the object. And the object here means the thing that that is undergoing the Sangha Kamma. So, for example, if you have a upasampada ceremony, in other words, an ordination ceremony, the object there is the person being ordained. Yeah, that is the object. Or if you have you are installing an officer of the Sangha, then it is the person being installed as an officer who is the object. If you are bestowing a katina robe on somebody, then the katina robe itself is the object, yeah, or the person receiving the katina robe. Those two things are then the object of the Sangha Kama. It can be more than one object. That's the object. So the object has to fulfill certain requirements, right? This is what this is about. The object has to be valid. The validity of the object is very obvious, for example, when it comes to things like ordination ceremony. The person has to be, for the monks at least, it has to be over 20 years old. Yeah, if not 20 or 19 and a half or whatever it is, depending on how you count the age of people. But you have to have a certain age, otherwise it's actually invalid. And the person has to have certain qualities. You can't have done the antaraika dhammas, yeah, the things that the antaraika dhammas are the kind of obstacles, yeah, the things that kind of lead to bad rebirth in the future, like schism, being a schismatic, and these kind of things, which are also a part of this. You can't have killed an arahant or your parents and that sort of stuff. So validity of the object, so essentially can be summarized as the wrong or missing information about the object of the decision here. So usually this is defined quite clearly in the Vinaya. We know what these qualities are because it is actually talked about in the Vinaya Pitaka. But if we make our own decisions that are outside of what is defined in the Vinaya Pitaka, if we make a decision about, where money is going to be spent, if we're going to build kutis or not, these kind of things, well, then we have to decide what we mean by the validity of the object. And I would argue that the validity of the object means that we have the right information when we make a decision. Obviously, if you have the wrong information, you can't make a proper decision. So wrong or missing information invalidates a Sangha Kama, and then it can be redone. We had some examples of that recently at Vinaya Monastery, where we were discussing whether the Sangha Kama we had done was really valid or not. And I said, well, it is valid as long as the information we were given about it actually turned out to be correct. And if the information we had was wrong, well, then probably it isn't necessarily valid, because then we have made the decision on the wrong assumptions. And that, of course, is problematic. Yeah.
So just check that one with you. You make a Sangha Karma and you subsequently discover that there was an error of fact. So a Sangha Karma isn't a fixed institution that can't be touched again. It can be revised if new information comes to hand, but there is a reliance on it that it was a legal act until questioned.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends. I mean, if there's new information, it's a slightly different thing, because if it's new information, then you have to do a new Sangha Karma, basically. That I guess takes the place of the old one or whatever. Maybe, or is in addition to the old one, really. But if there is information that the information you had turns out to be wrong, yeah, well then the vatu, the object, turns out not to be the object that we were dealing with. So there's something wrong with the object. And in that case, I think there's no problem at all with saying that the whole Sangha Karma is actually invalid, so you can redo it. Yeah, no problem. And that was, I remember we had that discussion before, and that's really where I was coming from when I was talking about that. That's the fourth aspect of Sangha Karma. So that's a lot of information for you in a very short period of time, especially if you're not used to the idea of Sangha Karma. What do you think, Venerable Choki? Does this seem good or bad or neutral? Any comments?
It's very clear. One thing I wanted to raise about
Because talking about the decision being made about ordination, and I was reflecting that in our tradition, typically, it's the ordaining abbot who accepts somebody for ordination, and then that ordination goes ahead. There's no more discussion about whether that ordination will happen or not. So that's what happens in our...
What is the ceremony like that you have?
Well, it's the same. You've got to have your four bhikkhus there, or Gaylong there.
Yeah.
But it's like that decision's been made in the first place. And I was thinking of one example where one former abbot had ordained a couple of monks and then sent them to another monastery. And the abbot said, "What am I going to do with these guys? They've both got mental health issues." And he said, my job's to ordain them, your job's to look after them. And it was like, it's not my responsibility, which is not true, we know, but that's how it was said.
Okay. Gee, that's a bit rough, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a bit rough.
And I think that's not the ideal way of doing things.
No.
In fact, according to the Vinaya, if you ordain someone, there should be your disciples for at least 5 years after that. And if you don't, can't look at them, then they should find another teacher to look after them instead. So there should always be.
Yeah, I think Lama Yeshe, when they first started ordaining in FPMT, said, "Well, it's my role now to look after you, but I don't have any means." So that's where our International Mahayana, he said, set up this International Mahayana Institute, which is the organisation for monks and nuns of our of FPMT, to set that up as in lieu of him personally being able to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, the thing is that the way it works with us is actually a little bit similar to what you were saying, because the ordination has become a pure ritual, really, and it has really been decided beforehand who is going to ordain or not. But the ritual actually comes from this. The Sangha Kamma, which here has a real purpose, has turned into a ritual. So if you take the ritual as a real Sangha Kamma, you are actually allowed to object during the ritual. So for you as well, the decision may have been beforehand, but you're actually allowed to object during the ritual, because that is the Sangha Kamma that you're doing. So this is kind of the point here. But very often it is decided beforehand, because the situation now is quite different from what it was in those days. In those days, the monks would suddenly come together and someone would kind of be ordained, and the only time they came together to discuss these things was during the Sangha Kamma meetings. But these days, it's a bit more settled. It's a different kind of monasticism these days. So, yeah. Okay, let's look at the Sangha Kamma wording, because I just mentioned this before. And so this was one of the things that I left a little bit unfinished. And so this is taken from the Parivara. Sometimes the Parivara is the last book of the 5 books of the Vinaya Pitaka. You have the Sutta Vibhanga, which is the 2 first books, which are divided into the Bhikkhu Vibhanga and the Bhikkhuni Vibhanga. And this is the Vibhanga, means something like analysis. So it's the analysis of the Patimokkha rules of the Bhikkhus and the Bhikkhunis. And then you have the Khandaka. The Khandakas are the 22 chapters that have all the regulations about Sangha Kammas in particular, but also a large number of minor rules and some Jataka stories. And it's quite nice, actually, the Khandaka section. And then the very last book is the Parivara, which is a kind of an Abhidhammic kind of analysis of the Vinaya. And some of the things in the Parivara are actually quite interesting, because it adds things in there which are missing in the Vinaya, and kind of make it more clear what we are supposed to do. So, for example, the chapter on Katina, the Katina ceremony, is very interesting in the Parivara, because it actually is necessary for us to really understand how the Katina works. Another thing which is interesting is this particular point here, found in the Parivara, which talks about how the legal procedure fail in respect of motion. This is my translation. Jeepers, that's not very nice translation here. How can I translate so badly? I feel embarrassed now. How does a legal procedure fail in respect of motion? I guess it's kind of understandable, but it's not it's a bit formal, isn't it? Yeah. So anyway, it means that how is the motion presented in such a way that it doesn't really fulfill the criteria? That's really what it means, right? So this is what the Parivara says, because the Vinaya is not really fully clear about this. In 5 ways. You do not bring up the subject. The subject is what I call the object, or the vatu, just before. So just to kind of confuse people, subject and object are here the same. You don't bring up the Sangha. You don't bring up the person. You don't bring up the motion, or you put forward the motion after the announcement. I already talked about the last one already. You put up the motion at the wrong time. You don't bring up the motion at all. Yeah, they also talked about that. But the three last ones here are what really decides whether a Sangha Kamma is valid or not. And the point here is that if we include all of these things in when we make an emotional announcement, then the Sangha is valid. The Sangha Kamma is valid. So the subject here, or the object here, is the thing that we are talking about. Yeah, this is the person being ordained, or the katina robe being bestowed on someone, or wherever it is. So you have to touch on that subject. If you don't touch on that, then no one knows what's going on. Yeah, so how on earth can you have a valid Sangha Kamma if no one has any clue what's happening here? You have to touch on the Sangha, the idea that the Sangha is making the decision. Yeah, this is a decision we're making as a group. So you have to mention that every time to ensure that people understand this is not a private decision made by an individual or a group, but by the Sangha as a whole. And the last thing here is the person. And the person in this case means things like the upajaya, for example. So in a Sangha Kamma where you have an ordination ceremony, not only do you have the object or the subject, which is the person being ordained, but you have additional people as well that needs to be touched upon. And that is the upajaya in this context, the preceptor. So this gives you the minimum requirements for constructing your own Sangha Kamma. Yeah? If you are given these minimum requirements, you can actually make any Sangha Kamma you want. As long as this is fulfilled, then you are basically in business. And you can see, if you look at this, basically what it means is that you have to make the Sangha Kamma understandable to the present Sangha. If everyone understands what is going on, then you are okay. That's essentially what this comes down to. If people have no idea what's going on, obviously you have a problem, right? So people have to sort of, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. We're ordaining someone. What? We're ordaining this person? No way. Now I get it. Then you have a problem there. Yeah. So that is for the motion, how the motion is to be done. Yeah. Then how do legal procedures fail in respect of announcement? So yeah, first you have the motion, then you have the announcement. And so here you are in 5 ways. You do not bring up the subject, same thing again. You don't bring up the Sangha, same thing again. You don't bring up the person, yeah, same thing again. They mangle the proclamation of the legal procedure, and they proclaim at the wrong time. They proclaim at the wrong time, again, is similar to what we had before. You make the proclamation before the motion, for example. You get it the wrong way around, it's illegal. But the last one here is interesting, yeah, the idea of mangling the proclamation of the legal procedure. This is a translation of the Pali word hapeti, and it's derived from the root, which means to something being destroyed or diminished, ha root in Pali. And this is a translation done by Ñāṇatusita. Ñāṇatusita is one of the great scholars of the monastic Vinaya. He has written a word-for-word analysis of the Patimokkha, which goes over 500 A4 pages, something like that. It's a massive kind of work that he has done, and it's very interesting and very well done. And one of the things that he talks about in there, I think, is this idea of hapeti, and he has analyzed this to mean that it means mangling. In other words, mangling means that you're not clear in what is going on. Yeah, it's mangled in a sense of not really enabling people to understand what is happening here. Yeah, so it should be clear. People should be able to understand. And if it is not understood by the assembly, then that may invalidate the Sangha Kamma. Of course, you can imagine this opens up a Pandora's box of additional problems, right? What if one person doesn't understand? Has he mangled it? What if that person was falling asleep? I mean, it opens up all kind of massive problems. That's why you get sub-commentaries and sub-commentaries and modern commentaries and all kinds of stuff, because it is very tricky, really, to know exactly where the boundaries are for many of these things. But the general principles are, I think, very interesting and important. So these are the things that we have to keep in mind when we do our next Sangha Kammas at Bodhinyana Monastery. Wow, this is going too slowly. So let's go. Let's have a quick look at an example. Yeah, before maybe I should stop there because we're just going too fast. It's kind of crazy. If I can't do everything, that's fine. Does anyone? What do people think about this? Do people have any comment about this? Or
Just keep looking back at the word mangle.
mm,
A mangle was a piece of apparatus in working class houses, yeah,
yeah.
150 years ago, which was about taking water out of the clothes while you were, in the cleaning process, like take it away,
Yeah.
or even trying to give some purity to the cloth before the next part of the process.
And it got mangled in the process, the cloth.
But the mangle was that you put it between the jaws. Yeah. So I'm not trying to be pedantic, but if that was taken from the Pali sometime further back, then that could give a different sense to the word mangle.
So maybe a bit different translation, maybe. That would be better. Yeah. Okay, good. I just took it from there to that without really considering it all that much. But that may be a point that we should retranslate. What would be a better word?
Mess up.
Mess up. That's certainly colloquial enough. That's I like colloquial. Samsara. Yeah. Confuse, maybe. Yeah. Or yeah. Anyway, I can find a word. Yeah. Unclear. Maybe that. Yeah. Unclear. Simple as that. Yeah. Yeah. But misstate is not necessarily what it is about. It may just be lack of clarity. So that's a bit different from misstating. Yeah. But anyway, it could mean misstated. Actually, I probably need to do more research when I think about it now. I didn't know exactly what is meant here.
Misconstrued.
Misconstrued. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to have a look afterwards at an exact example of this from a Sangha Kamma. But should we wait till afterwards? Or is it getting maybe too late now? It's nice to have a bit of a break before we do before we have lunch, I suppose. Okay. Any further ideas? Complaints? Any? Venerable from Bhutan, are you? What do you think here? Do you agree or disagree? Is it all right? Yeah, are you sure? Yeah, you're allowed to disagree, In Australia, you can disagree at least. You can say, "What? That's terrible. I don't believe this."
I have a question.
Okay. Yeah. Who's laughing over there?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah. Go for it.
Okay. When the motion and announcement is being made, who decides who's going to carry out these things? Who's going to recite?
Yeah. This is actually coming up in a second, but it said the Vinaya says it has to be a competent and astute monastic. And the definition of competent and astute is that you have to know how to make a motion and announcement. That's essentially what, ideally it is more than that, but that's kind of the minimum requirement of being a competent and astute person is you have to know the motion and announcement. So I think what happens in practice is that in other parts of the Vinaya, it says that the most senior person present is if someone wants to talk on Vinaya, and this would be part of talking in the Vinaya, it is the most senior person present who appoints them and who gives them the right. Yeah, you cannot just start talking on the Vinaya on your own. You have to actually be appointed, and you have to ask the Sangha, and then the most senior, I can't remember now how it is done. It's done in different ways, but usually it's a senior monk who will then, or the senior nun who will appoint you and say, you do it. I think.
So is there like beforehand some discussions then, like, if there is a big body of Sangha and you want to make a Sangha Kamma, and, is that those things discussed before and decided and then you do the formalized thing, or how should it work?
I don't think it has to be discussed before. I think this is the thing about the Vinaya. Everything seems to have been done on the spot. Yeah, so everyone knows that they're coming together to do a ordination ceremony, and then it is decided right there who is to do the chanting or whatever. It has to be done there. It can be decided. There's nothing wrong with doing it beforehand, But I don't think it is a requirement. Yeah.
No, other things, not those kinds of very obvious things, but if you're doing Sangha karmas, other building or whatever, like sometimes just in a time people to think about it, or to say,
Venerable, please hold on. Like, we cannot hear you properly. Could you? There's a bad connection or something. Would you mind trying again, please?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. Not about the obvious things like the ordination card, any other. Can you hear me?
Still no good. Yeah, it's terrible. The connection is really bad. I can't hear you properly.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. Let's take it after lunch. It's getting late now. We need a break before lunch. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. You can hear me.
We can't hear you. Yeah. Never mind. We'll do it after lunch, Venerable. So. Okay. Please go ahead. Yeah.
You can me? Okay. I can write it to the chat.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Later on. Yeah. We'll come back after lunch. Okay.
Never mind.
Yeah. This is all right. Okay, everyone, let's have an hour and a half break here. I'm just going to pay respect to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha before we go.